This is May the 15th, 1982, at the Williamson's Restaurant at 1401 South Federal Highway in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This tape is being made at the conclusion of the annual reunion of the Fort Lauderdale Alumni Club, which included classes from 1916, the second graduating class of Fort Lauderdale High, through 1932. And that meeting has just ended, and I have with me, sitting on the couch with me, is Mr. Mark Mahannah, who grew up in Fort Lauderdale. Mr. Mahannah is the head of the Mark Mahannah Company Incorporated Golf Course Architects in Miami, Florida. Mr. Mahannah, you tell us when you came to Fort Lauderdale.
Family came to as far as Palm Beach in 1913, and after a short stop over there, Lake Worth Hotel or similar establishment, came into Fort Lauderdale in January of 1914, and it was our home since that time.
Now, give us the date of your birth.
I was born 1905, September 26.
September 26, 1905. And what, you're born in Iowa? Or what city in Iowa?
Delta, Iowa.
Delta, Iowa.
Southeastern section of Iowa.
Southeastern part of Iowa. So you came to Fort Lauderdale, or to what is now the greater Fort Lauderdale area, in 1914. What was your father engaged in? What kind of activity? Was he a farmer?
He was a farmer, dairy farmer and farmer.
And how many?
Farmer first and then dairy farmer.
And then how many were in your family? Your mother, and then how many children?
There's 5 of us boys.
Would you name what was your father's name, his full name?
My father's name is Charles Sophia.
How you spell that?
S-O-P-H-I-A. Sophia. That's a family name on his mother's side.
I see. And Mahannah's M-A-H-A-N-N-A-H.
Right.
And your brother's name, and tell us their name, and starting with the oldest one.
The oldest was Vance, Wade, Keith, Mark, and Forrest.
So you're the second to the youngest.
Second and youngest. And quite a spread between the third and the fourth.
Oh, so it's quite a spread between you and your brother just above you. When was he born?
I don't know anything about the dates of their birth and so on.
But I mean,
he was about 7 years older than I, and the next one was about 8 or 9 years older, and then the first one was about 10 to about 11 or 12 years older than I.
And your brother Forrest, how much younger?
A year and a half younger.
Year and a half younger.
Yeah. He's deceased as of recently, about a year or so ago.
So there were no daughters no girls in the family.
No, just the boys.
All right, now when you came to Fort Lauderdale, where did you settle?
We at first were met at the train. I remember that. By Mr. Rickard, Mr. Clarence Rickard, the father of Grace Rickard here.
Right.
And all of the Rickards, that family are deceased except Grace.
And also he was related to James Rickard.
James Rickard was his brother.
James Rickard, who was former superintendent.
He was his brother.
Was superintendent of Broward County Schools, was his Clarence Rickard brother. Now, Mr. Rickard, was he in the building business then?
He was in the lumber business.
Lumber business,
not
right.
building, but
I'm sorry, lumber business, yes. And his place was right there by the track.
Right by the track,
Right by the track, yes. Now, what part, did you tell us what part you moved to, the first place you lived?
Well, when we first arrived, Mr. Rickard had found a place of accommodations, some house around the general area there, someplace. Too young to know much about it. But we stayed there for probably in town and very close to where Mr. Rickard lived, close there on one of the corners. We stayed in town probably almost a year, not quite. And then after that, I don't know what Dad was doing. He was looking around, just seeing what he did want to do. There wasn't much doing in town at that time at all, anyway.
All right, let me stop you just a minute. Let me stop you just a back on the air, and after checking the tape. All right, Mr. Mahannah, would you please proceed about where you lived when you first came here?
For a period short of a year, after staying in downtown, what would be downtown now, Fort Lauderdale, we moved to a farm north of Fort Lauderdale, about 3.5 miles north. Which,
What are you waiting for, Ryan?
No, we're taping, Jimmy.
In a little settlement known at that time as Colohatchee. The farm that we moved to was a little 35-acre tract, approximately a quarter of a mile east of the depot that was known as the Colohatchee Depot.
You know, so that
Station.
right. So that means that you lived east of the railroad track, then.
East of the railroad tracks.
So about how many people would you say? Just a horseback calculation. How many people would you say were living in Colohatchee at that time, right in that general environs?
Oh, about 30 or 40.
30 or 40 people. Do you remember the names of any of those people?
Yeah.
Could you just mention several of them, if you will?
Mr. and Mrs. Hughes. Mr. and Mrs. Stop now.
All right, among the people that you knew there was Mr. Brass, B-R-A-S, and his daughter. You remember her name?
Yes, can't think of it. We've talked about it.
Yeah, later she married Otto T. Herbert. So
That's right.
so her name, she was generally known as Mrs. Herbert. They married about 1915 or 16.
Yeah, something like that.
Can you remember anyone else? We'll come back to Mr. Brass in a minute because I want to
Mr.
talk
and
to
Mrs. C.W. Johnson.
C.W. Johnson.
Mr. and Mrs. G.T. Smith.
G.T. Smith, yes.
Yes,
Guy Smith was their son.
Yeah. One of the Smiths, anyhow.
Right.
I'm not certain.
Well,
about
Guy
that.
lived
So
right along the
they-
railroad track. He lived
That's
right
it.
along the railroad track there, yes.
And Mrs. Russian with their family of boys.
Russian?
Yeah, Russians.
Was that R-U-S-H-I-N?
Don't know.
Or R-U-S, or you spell it then?
I don't know.
Or just Russian,
yeah,
Mr. and Ms. Russian.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Whitby, how about Mr. Whitby lived?
Mr. Whitby.
Mr. Whitby
yeah.
lived in that neighborhood,
And
did he?
Paul Whitby and Paul was his daughter, his son. And
Mr. Whitby came there in 1898.
Right. They lived north of town, north of Colohatchee.
Right. He's generally considered to be the founder of Oakland Park. That's the area in which he lived.
Well, I found Oakland Park, but Oakland Park was sometime.
Yeah, that
later
was
than
way down. That was
Colohatchee,
way
because
down the line.
That was
Right.
commencement or the initiated by the boom.
Right. 1914, there was a school there called the Whitby School. So
Right, that's where I first went.
you went to Whitby School? Where was that Whitby School located?
And, sweet Olander, Carl Olander,
Yes.
just died here about a year and a half ago. No, in less than a year ago. He went to the same school with me.
Can you tell me where that school is located in reference, say, to Oakland Park Boulevard?
That would be a little bit difficult. It would be further north than that, up toward Pompano.
Be further north than Oakland
Yeah.
Park. But it wouldn't be very far from the track, would it? Railroad track.
Well, it was about a quarter of a mile from the track. Maybe not that far.
Would that
just
be-
about. It was just one farmhouse, if you call it that, west off of the old Dixie Highway.
West of the old Dixie Highway.
About a mile and a half north of the Oakland Park Boulevard.
About a mile and a half. What kind of building was it? Was it a regular school building,
Just
one
a
room?
No, it it was his home.
It was
Part
his
of a
home.
yeah. And he had moved then to a newer, better house on the east side of the tracks, and almost directly opposite where this little place was that they had called home in the first place that he'd built his home.
Do you remember your first school teacher there? Her name or his name? Or?
I could, but I don't remember. I can. It was. I could think about it.
Well, if you think of it, we'll go into something else. If you think of it, just throw it in. Now, about how many pupils would you say there when you went there? You said that was your first school you attended, which would be about, what, 1915, thereabouts, 14, 15, in that general period.
Yeah.
Would
At
you
that time, there had probably a dozen of us.
About a dozen. And one teacher would teach all of you then.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. You didn't have it. Actually,
it seems to me that it was Marie Brock, but I'm not sure.
Actually,
and that's significant too, because she's sister of Georgiana Brock, the pianist here.
I see. So that means that.
But I'm not sure about that. But it just does seem so because. Anyway, go ahead.
That means that wasn't a regular constructed. I mean, it wasn't a building constructed for a school. It was really a deserted farmer's old home.
It was a building. It was a building that was constructed as a home, as a farm side home for Mr. Whitby in the first place. No screens in it, nothing of the sort. And then it was utilized just as a school by whatever little changes had to be made, and he'd moved to another place. That's the best of my recollection, anyhow.
You didn't have any regular school ground. I guess you just played out in the palmettos or whatever there was around the building. Was that?
Sure. No such thing as school grounds. The world was their school ground out there. Where you could go and just be careful of snakes and so forth.
Did you think the school was hard? Do you have that recollection, or was it easy?
It was fun.
It was fun.
Yeah,
in what way was it fun?
absolutely.
In what way was it fun?
Well, because it was kids were free to run and chase around and do a lot of things that without being inhibited by close and controlled tenants, except when we were in the classrooms, and the intensity of educational procedures and learning processes was nowhere thought of at that time, and we learned what we could or what they could teach us of our ABCs and so on, and seemed to progress very well to the point where we could mature to another grade or two, which happened to be in Fort Lauderdale.
How many grades did they have up at that Whitby school?
The only one I went to was just a one.
And what grade would that be? First grade, second, fifth, or sixth?
That's about the third grade.
And then after that 1 year, you went to Fort Lauderdale School.
Fort Lauderdale.
And that was located, of course, at that time.
South of the river.
Oh, that was in the old building down there.
Well, the old building, which
Later became the courthouse.
Which would be now the Elks Club, I guess.
Well, the Elks Club was in there, and then that building had been torn down. The Florida Power and Light have their
now
building.
it's something else.
The Florida Power and Light building
Yeah,
now,
all right.
yes.
Yeah.
Did you wear shoes to school?
No.
I didn't wear shoes to school until I got to the 7th grade.
I don't remember that I had any shoes.
We used to have what we call our Sunday shoes, and that was
I
it.
had a pair of shoes, and that's what we wore to Sunday school. But even at the very early days, we didn't wear shoes to Sunday school.
Do you remember that woman's club up there in Colohatchee? Remember
Well,
what
of
woman?
course.
And
I
that
know
woman's
what it was
club?
built.
Yeah? Tell us about that. I remember it was
Don't
torn
remember
down
too
some
much
years
about
ago.
it,
It was
but
torn
it was
down.
built by the women's club. They'd collected some funds and so on, and got the farmers and the people, the residents and the inhabitants around there to contribute, and which they did generously, considering the times. And they had this triangular piece between the Old Dixie Highway and the road that went off on a tangent from it, that followed the railroad track. And the area in between was the C.W. Johnson Dairy, except for this triangle. And don't know who gave them the triangular area, but I know that they managed to raise enough funds and interest and so on, and the community built that women's club. And my mother was one of the active ones in that at the time too.
But let me just rehearse a minute. Now, you said it's about 30 families living up there when you came there, or 30 people.
30 or 40 people.
30 or 40 people, not families.
No, not
So
families. It must have been. I have no idea about. I have no recollection about the number of people or the number of settlers or families, and never thought too much about it. But seems to me that 50 would be quite a number.
Now, excuse me.
Yeah, that's all.
Mr. W.G. Collier came to that area in 1892. We have a count of obituary of his death. He died in 1922.
Yeah.
So you were a contemporary in a sense of Mr. Collier.
I was a contemporary in the final.
Yeah, his last years. Yes,
of,
right.
Of his life.
Because he was born about 1847. So you know.
Yeah.
All right. Now, do you remember him?
Where he came. Yeah.
Yeah, we have his bishop. He came from Texas to Florida, to Miami first, and then back up here. He came here about the same time as Tranahan did. He came in 1892, according to the newspaper account, when he died. Now, do you remember seeing him?
Yeah.
Can you describe him for us? Do you have?
This is in the final. This is in the twilight of his life, and of course he made no impression on anybody, kids and so on, especially at our age, except that he was remembered to be just an old man, wheezing and dried up from the sun and living the aesthetic, not aesthetic, but the what do you call it? Single life. He had no one to help him. He just presented that sort of a figure to us.
Was he a friendly? I mean, do you remember him as a friendly person?
Not particularly. And
Did he smoke or drink, or do you remember anything like that about him?
No.
Was he tall, short, or?
He was a medium height fellow. Could have been a very large fellow when he was younger and full of, life.
Yeah. See, no one has ever described this man, and we're trying to get some background on him because that place now is called Wilton Manors, where old Colohatchee's Wilton Manors today.
Right. And his farm, before we get to, rather than go into that, we might finish about what it looked like, but best of my recollection was that he was just sort of a dried up, weather-beaten, mosquito-eaten, swiveled sort of a fellow, because this is in the twilight of his life and you wouldn't expect much else. And he was taciturn and dry and not any humor. And he was, of course, not unfriendly, but he wasn't too friendly, because you probably had to be a little careful of because of safety and.
He was single then. He was single.
Yeah.
He didn't.
He didn't have any help at all.
Yeah, he didn't have any money. I mean, he wasn't known as a man that was worth much money, was he?
Well, he wasn't exactly a poor man, but he wasn't considered among the inhabitants around there as being what you'd call wealthy. But he wasn't a poor man because he had this large grove, and it certainly had everything that he needed.
Where would you place that grove?
Oh, I don't know. I can remember it just as well as I can anything. It was on the southeast section or corner of the intersection of the railroad track and the river. the North Fork of the river.
Okay. So would you say it again? That's you talk about Middle River. That's a fork of Middle River,
North
right?
Fork and the South Fork,
Right.
yeah.
So where was it?
We call it the Colohatchee River.
Yeah.
It wasn't called the Middle River at that time.
Right.
Wasn't even known about that.
So where was it? Now, it was near at the corner
It
of.
was at the southeast section. It was the southeast corner of the railroad right-of-way intersection and the North Fork of the river. I said,
So that
better than that. It was at the southeast. It's set in the southeast area of the railroad track and the where the river.
So that means he was north of the river. Then he was on the north side of the river.
No, he was on the south side. Southeast side.
Oh, he was on the southeast
side.
Oh, I see. Then actually, that's in Fort Lauderdale. That's in Fort Lauderdale today because
oh my God, yeah.
Wilton Manors is on the opposite side of the river. When you cross the river, then you're in the Wilton Manors.
Of course, it's in Fort Lauderdale now, but in those days, it was quite a little trip to get to Fort Lauderdale.
Absolutely, yes.
I mean, through wilderness sort.
Now, of course, that's what the newspaper said, that he'd come there and plant his citrus grove. So now there's another very interesting character in Colohatchee. There's lived in time that you were there, and that was Mr. Brass, B-R-A-S. And we already talked about his daughter, Mrs. O.T. Herbert.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Brass, would you give us a background on him about some of the things that he did?
Mr. Brass, as I remember him, and what little I knew about him for being a boy at that age, he was employed by the school board to drive the school bus to collect the kids as far as the present Oakland Park. And
what did he have? What did he drive? Did he drive a car? Or?
He drove a horse and wagon.
Drove a horse and wagon to get the kids.
The wagon was a school wagon that had a top on it and a row of seats on both sides, lengthways of the wagon.
And it was drawn by a horse, was it?
Drawn by a horse. He drove the horse, and he lived about, I would judge, about 2 blocks away from where Georgiana Brock was raised. Walter Brock and Georgiana Brock was raised there on the hill. And he kept the horse, which is his, and he had a contract, I guess, with the school board for that. And then he'd go north to Oakland Park, pick up the kids, take them, deliver them to the Lauderdale school, go back to his house, and put the horse up, rest a while, whatever, and then go on to the school and deliver them after school was out.
And you rode in this wagon?
I rode in the wagon. What time we didn't run and hop and skip along, and because it was just as easy running alongside as it was to ride in that wagon.
So in other words, he didn't race the horse. The horse was a walking horse.
A walking horse. Oh, he'd trot a lot, but I mean, there was no speed limits broken about the thing.
And this wagon was really owned by the school board, but he owned the horse.
No, I think it was very likely that he owned a horse and
I see.
wagon too, but it
so
was,
he had a contract.
The route contract for the route.
I see. How many could that wagon hold?
That hold, I would guess it could hold, 20 kids.
So in other words, he took care of the people up around what we now call Oakland Park and Colohatchee in that area, and took them down to across the river, down to the schoolhouse, and he picked them up.
See, there were no kids going to, going to high school that I knew of, so they didn't have anybody like that to deliver. It was just all small, young school kids.
You didn't have to pay, your parents didn't have to pay anything for it, though. That would be by the county. That'd be by the county.
No charge.
Do you remember do you remember anything characteristic about him? Was he tall, short? Do you have a beard?
Yeah, he was kind of a large, heavy-set fellow, and of quite a pleasant, fine charactered man, and it seems to me that he came from Iowa too originally. But he was a veteran of the Civil War, and he was quite elderly, of course, at that time. And it was about all he ever that he could do is to take care of his little school contract, take care of the horse and such, and upkeep of his little house. And
do you remember? Did he have a wife? Is his wife living then, or?
Oh, his wife had been dead apparently for some time. Never did hear anything about it except I doubt that I've ever heard anything about it except that she had been gone for some length of time.
Do you remember?
I don't know why or anything.
Do you remember any peculiar incident, colorful incident of going to school? For example, somebody said, and I read in print some time ago, that Mr. Brass, one time he put a goat and pulled that wagon with a goat. Does that sound? No, that didn't sound.
That's impossible.
It sounded improbable to me.
Impossible because the wagon's
too big for that.
All right. And he always had a horse, and I'm sure that we knew that we started early enough that I knew about it about as early as he started making deliveries.
Because we're talking about 1915 and 16. We talk about that period.
Well, you see, I was going. I went to Fort Lauderdale school after that short little trip to Whitby School. I don't know how long that was, but it was very little length of time. I don't know whether it's even a full season or not. It seems to me that it wasn't. We then went to school in Fort Lauderdale. I was in the 7th grade in Fort Lauderdale.
That's the first grade you remember being in?
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale was 7th grade? So up at Whitby, you was probably in the 6th grade then?
Yeah. But I think Mr. Brass's school delivery was just about initiated about that time.
Now, how long
could
did
have been there a little early, but I doubt it because there wasn't any need to bring anybody from that.
Because there wouldn't have been anybody up there
to bring.
Right. Now, how long did you live there in Colohatchee?
Well, Dad had farm there.
No, I forgot to ask you, where was his farm located?
His farm was about a quarter of a mile east on what is known as Mahannah Road.
Oh, yes, I've heard of that Mahannah Road.
But it changed to some street designation now. But about a quarter of a mile east of the railroad track, where the center of Colohatchee used to be.
Oh, you mean the center? Wait a minute now. You mean the center of Colohatchee was actually east of the track?
No, center of Colohatchee would be considered. Actually, it would be considered the site of the women's club.
The women's club. That would be the center.
Women's club.
Okay.
As far as I would describe
so
it.
Some of it was east of the track and some was west of the track.
Some of it north and south and everywhere. That is Colohatchee itself.
Yeah. And what did your father raise on that? What was his main crop?
Usual products, produce, farm produce, peppers, eggplant, tomatoes, things of that sort.
Yeah, now I want to ask you a question about that in a minute, but first of all, I want to ask you, how long did you live in Colohatchee?
Well,
you went up there in about 1915, so...
We lived there until my father lived there until he moved to town. Finally, after a small interim period that he moved to town because of the storm, 26 storm, or about that time. But he finally moved to town about 1930. Mm, 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that.
So your father,
I'm not sure.
so your father
Somewhere
lived
around
out there all that time until he came to Fort Lauderdale in the mid-30s then.
roughly
And
mid-30s.
of course you graduated Fort Lauderdale High School in 1923.
And after that,
You were mostly out of there after that,
I
weren't
was
you?
out of there after that. Yeah.
Because you went to college, did you? And
I went to school, Florida State, University of Florida.
University of Florida.
But we had 2 hurricanes devastating that hit us and the state and us. In 1926 and 28, the time that I was going, and it just about plowed us under, so I didn't finish.
You didn't finish the University of Florida then. All right, now let's go back just a minute. Fort Lauderdale school, of course, was built up on what we now call 3rd Avenue and 2nd Street in Fort Lauderdale, way out of town then. And it opened its doors in September 1915. So you went up in Whitby about 1 year. So about 1916, you must have come into Fort Lauderdale High School.
Fort Lauderdale High.
Because that building opened in September 1915.
Well, I was 16, let me see, before that, because I went there when I was 7 years old. And that would be, I think, 19, let's see. We've got some conflicting dates here that can't seem to rectify. We came in Fort Lauderdale in 1914, January. So I must have been about 8 years old. So the time that I went to the Whitby school wasn't more than probably a semester.
And then you went down
I went down there
to the south side.
Certainly was in the 7th grade when I went there.
Okay, then you were in the South Side School,
Southside School.
But you wouldn't have been there very long because they built that school up on
yeah, we
3rd
we
Avenue.
Were there, let me see, I was there to in the 7th grade.
Oh, I see. They probably kept that they sold it to the county, right?
No, they, I think, probably just 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
1 year, and then you moved over to the other school.
I moved over to the other school because I was in the 8th grade at the new school.
Right, because, do you remember the first drinking fountain over that school? I have an account of it. It was about how they caught the water off the roof, and they funneled it down, and you drank the water that came off the roof.
You mean the first school?
No, the new school.
The new one?
Yeah. I have an account of it, how they got the water off.
Oh, you mean the siphon, the rainwater?
Right,
off the
the rain off the roof.
Yeah. Water was collected in those days, everywhere, for the most part.
All right, notice you would use rainwater to do your drinking and cooking with, right?
Very great deal of it. Of course, it didn't continue that very long because they could easily see how contaminated it could get and full of wiggle tails. My God, you had to screen them out in order to drink it. But it was amazing, too, that would exist because, they knew how to drill wells, but there's very little of that ever done.
But now, the first electric and water company here was, I have an account of Tom Bryan, his group. Now, Tom was the president of the company.
Tom Bland.
But I'm talking about Tom Bryan, Tom M. Bryan. Anyway, they sold it.
Tom Bryan.
Yeah, they sold it to the Southern Utilities in 1913 at the beginning. So it appears that probably the first waterworks and power works was either in 1911 or 1912. So by the time that you were started the Fort Lauderdale School, they had electric power over there. And they probably had started some water over there, too, hadn't they? Some city water coming in there? Or can you remember that?
Because I can remember using a drinking fountain at the first school.
Yeah.
And where that
down on
water
the
came
south
from,
side.
I don't know. We just thought it came out of some sort of it didn't occur to me to think
They didn't even think
about
about where it came from.
No,
right.
didn't care.
Most of us don't think about that.
So they had drinking fountains in the hallway and around. Thought that was a real fine thing.
All right, now you knew Ernest Bradley. Well, first of all, you knew J.S. Rickards.
Yeah.
And how did he impress you? Did he? Was he a?
Well, he
was he?
impressed us kids with being very tough.
He was a tough man.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got a
He
great
was really
reputation as being.
severe.
He was an innovator. He did a lot of things that were different. That's the word we have. Would you agree with that?
I would imagine. I couldn't pass on it, not being old enough to have considered it at that time. But I would imagine that he did a lot of innovating, but he is very severe, sort of a taskmaster, and he is mean.
He was mean.
Rather severe too. And,
did he ever whip anybody?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
He threatened us a few times, and we could see that it was going to be tough to be carried through. But he did whip a few fellas.
Did he ever whip you?
No. And he didn't, but it was just by the skin of our teeth we got away from it.
What did they whip you with? What did he whip you with?
Well,
or what did he whip the student?
He had some sort of a rubber hose that he used. And we were quite afraid of that too, because we're used to floggings and whippings and knocking around a lot. Anyhow, in those days, very few.
Your parents would give you those too.
Very few boys at my age or at that time would get themselves pulled up by the ears without a little bit of flogging and knocking around.
Those are the old days.
Oh, you bet.
How about Ernest Bratzel? You remember Ernest Bratzel?
Yeah.
Of course, he had a German background.
Yeah, he was a German.
Yeah, and he taught Latin and German.
Sort of fellow, and he was certainly impressed me. And see, some ideas that has given me or has left me with an impression is not what I knew, but what one would gather as he listens to his elders or his elders talk and so on. Well, my dad was on the school board for many years.
Right.
And he was on school board when Mr. Rickard was there.
Mm-hmm.
And not that was a matter of common conversation or anything, but from those conversations or from meeting, being with him when he was with Mr. Rickard and other members of the board and whatever have you, I got this impression or the other, and that's about the way I know things as I know it now.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a good educator, and he didn't.
That's Mr. Bratzel. That's Mr. Bratzel.
Well, both of them.
Oh yeah, both of them.
Both
Okay.
of them were.
All right.
And Mr. Bratzel was a more tempered sort of a fellow, tempered type of fellow.
In other words, you're saying Mr. Rickard had a temper, huh? Mr. Rickard had a temper?
He had a, I didn't say temper, but I would say that he was very severe.
Mm-hmm.
And, but Mr. Bratzel.
Oh, I see. He was temperate. Mr. Bratzel was temperate in the sense that he wasn't as severe as Mr. Rickard.
Bratzel impressed me as being a professor and a principal that had to do mainly with the upperclassmen and more advanced educational aspects.
Yeah, he taught Latin and German,
Right.
so he would have.
He was very much an intellectual
Mm-hmm.
type of administrator.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Rickard wasn't incompetent in his way of the sort. He was equally so, but his was more of a mechanical.
He had a reputation of being a good actor. He used to put on plays, and he used to act in the plays.
Which one?
Rickard
Yeah.
did.
He was more of a mechanical processor, whereas Mr. Bratzel was a academic processor.
Yeah, intellectual man.
Of his profession. Yeah.
Do you remember your first teacher at the high school? Do you remember who your first teacher was? Or I mean, one of your teachers, because I guess you had more than one.
No, I can remember the girl. She looks and what she's like, but I can't remember her name. And
what did she teach? A whole grade or a certain subject?
Fourth grade, and she taught full grade. Yeah. Oh, one teacher to a grade like that.
How about when you got into high school under where Mr. Rickard was and Mr. Batzel?
Well, Mr. Rickard wasn't there when I was in high school.
Oh, he wasn't?
It was somebody else.
Oh, that's right. He resigned.
I got
Yeah, he had resigned and went back. He went to Indiana. Right, you're right. And then he came back later.
But it was in some other business, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, he became the superintendent. First of all, he ran against the fellow from Dania.
Oh, that's right. He became the county superintendent.
He became the county superintendent in 1920 because the fellow, I'm fixing to call his name, they had a bitter election here in 1916.
Right.
The fellow from Dania became the, not Sparkman, but it's something like that. He became the principal superintendent. It was a bitter election. We have a count of charges and counter charges. And then Rickard went away, and he came back, and then this other man from Dania, he didn't run in 1920, so Rickard ran, and he was elected. That's who he was.
Well, I have to retract a little bit about the observation about my father being on the school board that early. He wasn't on the school board that early. He was at a time later.
I remember in 1925, he was on the school.
Yeah. Came back to be a superintendent.
Right, he was on the school board in 1925.
That might have been when Dad was on the school board.
Yeah.
Not way back when he was a professor.
I know in 1925 your father was on the board then, because we have the records on that. Okay, now.
I thought of these things.
Yeah, well, I studied these things. I have all the records, and I study them.
And I don't have any of the family to discuss it with anymore. Nobody knows anything about it anymore. In my group.
Let me find out some of the other teachers you had in high school. You had Myra Marshall. Her name was McElwain.
Miss
and then,
McElwain.
Then she married Elias Marshall.
We loved her. And
she's 92 years old now. Lives in Tallahassee.
Yeah, I met her here about when she was here last. About I think two meetings ago. I mean back.
Well, how long have you been meeting in these meetings?
Well, here, let's see.
How long is this thing? How long is this alumni? How long has this alumni thing been going on?
Well, yeah, I was trying to think about that the other day. How many we had now? But Gertrude Boyd knows.
Yeah.
Because she headed it up.
See, that's the first time I ever heard of it. This is the first time I ever heard of it.
Well, you get a hold of Gertrude. She's got a record. Her sisters, she and her sisters have a record of all this whole thing. They are the ones that initiated this thing in a big way. And they did a lot of the work and headed it up and were the principal performers in it until it got to where they felt that maybe they were keeping somebody else from doing what they would like to do, and so on. They backed out of it. So, but Gertrude was one of my class.
Yeah, right.
And she would know, and it seems to me this has been about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth or fifth.
I see.
And the first one, I think that was here, was when they had one tremendous gathering. I mean, they came out of the woodworks from all over, from California and everywhere, because it didn't encompass the number of classes it has now. It only went to about class 25, 24 or 25. And of course, there's a few of the old ones left yet of 17 and 18, as you heard today. And I'll guarantee you, more hugging and tear and arm shaking and
I can imagine.
and emotional something nothing like it.
All right, now to get back to this other, this is all interesting, but I can get that somewhere else. Because you're the only one who can give me the thing I want now. Can you remember some of your other teachers in high school? You had Ms. McElwain, who later became Ms. Marshall.
Yeah. Well, Miss McElwain was later when I got in high school. Miss Montgomery.
Miss Montgomery?
Estelle Montgomery.
Right.
She's still living.
She was teaching when I went to Lauderdale High.
Geometry.
Yeah.
And then there was Mrs. Rickard, which is in my first year high school.
Now her name.
Second, and
what's her first name?
Her name was.
Is it Rick?
She was an in-law of the Rickards.
I see.
She was one of the Rickards, but not of the family. Either one of the family. But I can't remember just what. And she was an excellent She was really great. I can't think of her first name. And there was Kimmel.
Bill Kimmel.
Was that him?
Yeah, Bill Kimmel. Yeah.
Oh, God dang it.
He came in 1919.
And Lord knows, Mary Frances Dawson.
Mary Frances Dawson.
The standout of all the lovelies. She was great. Super.
You know what she taught? You remember what she taught?
She was what do you call it? Theatrical.
Drama.
Drama. And history and different things, classics. And
her name was Mary Frances Dawson.
Mary Frances Dawson.
Who'd she marry?
And she married M. Lewis Hall.
Oh, she married M. Lewis Hall. Oh, yeah. He died 2 years ago, Lewis.
2 years ago, yeah. They had a couple of fine, great big old boys.
I had a long interview.
I guess.
Yeah, I stayed all day, April the 5th, with George English II.
Yeah.
I stayed all day and taped him.
Yeah.
And he was Louis Hall's law partner for a while.
Yeah, that's right.
And George hadn't made out bad himself.
I know, and they both they got their start. I don't know what this. You can't put gospel on this thing, on this tape that you're taping. But they both.
Well, George put a lot of gospel on.
Yeah, gospel.
Gossip. Well, George put some gossip on.
Well, what I'm mean is that they both made great strides when they joined Belcher Oil.
Mm-hmm.
And then how long they were with them, I don't know. But M. Lewis was also one of my teachers.
He taught too. He came here in 1919.
He taught. He was kind of a fill-in teacher, and then he taught quite a bit.
So M. Lewis Hall was kind of like a fill-in teacher.
He was kind of a fill-in teacher, and I guess
That means he's a good athlete.
Depend on what he needed to do. But,
what does that mean?
Well, I mean, how much time he had to give her.
I see. Because he was in the law. He was in the law business. Yes.
He was a very young lawyer, and at that time there wasn't anything of great magnitude going on. The boom hadn't really.
Right. He came here in 1919 when he was 19 years old.
Right, you young fellow from Georgia.
Yeah, from Georgia. Anyway,
real.
I mean, he's a good athlete too. Good athlete.
Yeah, you bet he was. Anyhow, he taught history, and I admired him a lot. I liked him. He was real. He was a boys' teacher, real boys' teacher. But he wasn't really a professional teacher. He was he did it because it was something to be doing, but he was good at it.
He made things interesting. He made things interesting.
Yeah.
You know who taught there in 1918 was Carl Hyson. You remember Carl Hyson?
Carl Hyson, but I wasn't in any of his classes.
He taught history in 1918.
He was either teaching below
or above,
something. I wasn't in any of his classes, although I knew him. He and my father were well acquainted and everything.
Yeah. He used to live in I understand he used to live in Colohatchee. It was called.
He lived in the South Park. Yeah.
In Colohatchee.
That is when it was. No, not the South Park. In the west area, but that was when it became not Colohatchee, but into a sort of a development area.
Right, when Willingham came.
Right, that's right.
Do you remember building those gates up there?
Yeah.
Or before we get into that, let's go back to get you out of high school.
I remember them in a way, but it was after I'd left
that
area pretty much.
Now, you were in class, some of the people in class with you are Phil Wadling, and Philip and Gertrude Boyd, and you, John Burwell,
Barclay Jacobson.
Mickelson.
He was quite a prominent boy around town. Real short.
Well, I knew Bob Mickelson. Was he kin to Bob?
Bob Mickelson. Barkley is what I always call him. It might have been a Bob. They might have called him Bob.
Well, it might have been a brother or uncle because the Mickelson came here in 1912.
Yeah, they were all early.
And who else was in that class?
Carl Olander.
Carl Olander. That's Swede. That's Swede.
Yeah. Tygo Dick Miller.
Dick Miller.
Yeah, Dickton Miller.
Oh, you mean Hugo? Yeah, Hugo. Oh, yeah, Hugo Dickton
Miller.
Miller.
Tygo.
Oh, Tygo?
Mm-hmm.
You know that he edited the school paper that appeared in the Fort Lauderdale Sentinel. He was the one that sent all the information in.
Yeah.
His name is right at the top.
Mm-hmm. Hugo.
Hugo, right.
But we always called him Tygo. You know, like kids call a guy full of something.
So now Charlie Krim was in the first graduating class in 1915. Of course, did you know Charlie? He became a lawyer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great baseball player, they tell me.
I went to school with his brothers.
Yeah, Harry, was one of them Harry?
Harry was either older or younger, I don't know which, but he was older than I.
Mm-hmm.
But there was another one. Harry, Charlie, and three of them. The one I knew, shoot, I can't think of his name right now. I don't know whether he graduated with us or not. I think maybe he moved away. Oh, and then there's a number of them. Editor Perello. Oh, hell, anyway, as far as that goes, that's a waste of time giving all that out on this because Gertrude Boyd gave the whole story on that.
Okay, now you're coming up to graduate in 1923. Now, were you on any athletic team? Did you play any sports?
I played. We played baseball and ran track.
Who was your coach in baseball?
Prescott.
Oh, Prescott, yeah. George English knew Prescott in Illinois. He knew him up there before he came down here.
He was a great track runner up there.
Okay, now...
he was a physics teacher down here, and science teacher in class.
Now...
in school.
Right. Now... it was that great... It was the 1921 team that Charlie Rhodes was on that makes so much fuss about. But how did your track team... You were on that track team that year in 23?
I was on the same thing.
Yeah, I got a picture of all of you on that track team. Bill Kimmel was the coach.
Seems to me that
Charlie Rhodes.
Right, but Charlie's a year younger. I mean, older than me. So I was probably on a team, but the one where we won the state championship was class 23, my class.
You won the state championship in 23.
In the track meet at the University of Florida.
Okay, you won. Well, Charlie was on 21. He graduated in 21.
But they didn't win that.
No, but he said they won it, except they had to give an oratory, had to give a speech, and they didn't give a speech, and Miami won it because they didn't give a speech. Now, when
that's a triangle thing down here, but the state meet is something else.
Did you have to give any oratory at the state meet?
No.
No. Well, that's what Charlie said. But Charlie and Bill Kimmel said that they had to give a talk up there, oratory. And they lost the oratory part. Well, that's what Bill Kimmel said, and Charlie said it too. He said that's what caused them to lose that year, but you won in 23. Now tell me for sure, why we call it Flying L's? Why is that the name?
Well, they've got a history on that thing. This fellow up here, he seems to know something about it too, listening to us. They've got a history on this thing because it was explained here the last meeting. And I thought that the class of 23, it resulted in the establishment of the Flying L. But they claim that 1 or 2 years before had done that. But I don't know what on or how come, because we were the ones that won the state championship, the first one in the track meet. And we didn't play any football because we didn't have any football.
No. Now, that track team, what did you do in the track team? What was your specialty?
I was a quarter and 440. I mean 440 and a half mile.
Did you wear track shoes?
Oh, God, yeah.
Because there's a lot of stories about people that used to didn't wear.
There wasn't anyone that didn't use track shoes, and he used them, but if they ran them off his feet, Charlie, he used them. But if they ran off his feet and they barefooted like all of us,
He told
didn't have to use them.
Yeah, he told me he kicked them off. He told me he kicked them off.
He probably kicked them off, yeah. But we all ran around barefooted. Hell,
Sure.
I used to work for his dad when he was building Venice out west there. And nobody wore shoes around town. I mean, kids of that age, you could go through Sandsford and everything by knowing how to scrub.
You ever have a stone bruise?
Oh, yeah.
Aren't they painful?
But you outgrow that, toughens it up, you know. But
how about excuse me? Go ahead.
He would run in them if he had good shoes that would fit him and so on. But if it didn't happen to, he'd let them fall off or kick off, and he'd run because they interfered with his running. But he was the only one. Nobody else did that to my town. You can't run your barefoot as good as you can with their shoes.
Was Charlie known as a good athlete?
All he could do was run.
Right.
Oh, he was a pole vaulter, but he wasn't a great pole vaulter. But he would run. He was a long distance, he's a miler, and he played baseball pretty good, but not super because he was shrimp. Little dried up shrimp, and always has been.
Oh yeah, I played against him.
We call him variously dusty and kinky and I don't know, different things.
He's born in 1903, and I used to play against him in 1934. That's when I saw you down at the old softball field, the Davis softball field, when I used to see you down there.
Yeah.
I used to see you down there.
I lived up at, I had an apartment, and my wife was taking care of this apartment. I was living there just for a short time. He sent a boy to school down here at this Lutheran school. Yeah. And we were at this apartment, triangle apartment up there. Well, triangle apartments north of the track, up at Progresso. You remember those big apartments, two-story that went like this? We lived there in one of them, and my wife took care of the other.
Now, you graduated from high school. Who's your baseball coach?
Seemed to me when I was there, it was Prescott. I'm not sure.
Now, let me ask you.
I don't remember too much, but we played a hell of a lot of baseball.
Because you didn't have softball back in those days.
No.
That came later. In my day.
We had basketball. But we had, I don't know.
Now, Philip Wadling played in basketball.
But Prescott was a basketball coach, too.
He coached about everything, didn't
he? Philip Wadling, this Carl that you saw here, he was one of the star boys on his basketball team. He was nice, tall, good.
How about Philip? Was he pretty good on basketball?
I don't know whether he did much anything. He was a little bit 2 or 3 years older than Carl, so that put him back where there wasn't much teams of any kind.
Yeah, but Philip. Didn't Philip graduate with you? Philip Wadling graduate with you?
Well, I call him Carl. Phil.
You call him Carl or Junie?
Junie, yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I never have called him Philip. I don't know where he gets a Philip. I guess that's his name.
Yes. Well, see, it's Philip. His name is Philip Carl.
Yeah.
His father was Carl Philip.
Well, we always called him Carl Wadling or Junie.
Junie. Well, now, was he pretty good athlete?
Good.
He good.
But he never ran any.
But he was basketball.
He was basketball principal.
Yeah.
And
he told me he was a basketball captain in 1923.
He was. He was a good one, too. He had the build for it, and he was really good. I mean, for kids in those days. But I didn't play it. I wasn't.
Where did y'all play basketball?
Had a gymnasium there.
At the school?
Yeah, big one.
Well, what happened to that gymnasium?
They tore it down.
Well, it wasn't the same one when I went to school there in the 1930s, was it? Because that gym wasn't that old. I was in the gym in 1932, 33.
Well, I would think it would be.
Huh.
When did that wooden floored building?
I can't remember whether wooden or not. Beautiful basketball there. You're right next to the canal? Backed up to the canal?
backed up to where the canal
Yeah,
is
right.
now.
Yeah, well, I mean, where the canal
Yeah.
used to run behind. It
Yeah.
must have been the same building then. I didn't. When
But
did
they
they?
tore that thing down.
Oh, I know they tore it down, but when did they build that thing?
Well, I don't really know, but when the school was first opened, and we went in a file from the school south of town, a whole file of kids, like an army marching, and with their flags and everything. We went over there to put our names or be at the ceremonies of the opening of this thing and everything.
Oh, you marched all the way from the school over on the
Yeah.
south side,
Yeah,
over there when they laid the
Yeah.
cornerstone or when
Right.
they had the dedication.
yeah, that's right.
The governor spoke here, Governor
Yeah,
Trammell.
something like that.
Governor
Yeah.
Trammell spoke
We
here
were
when
at
they dedicated the building.
We were at these ceremonies, and gosh, it was hot. God, we didn't care about that. None of us had hats on, of course, caps or anything. And
Well, was
the
the gym
poor
there
teachers
then? Was the
hurting
gym?
us, well, that's the thing. I say, I don't think the gym was there. I'm sure it wasn't. And I think though that it was built immediately after that or something, because we used to play. There was a ditch there. Wasn't any canal around it anywhere. There was a ditch, Stranahan ditch, like went down towards Stranahan's old place out in the river, and that was full of cypress trees. And growing in this ditch in a natural native like form. And I know that at recess and so on, like particularly in the sixth grade, that I can remember the earliest and the best about, we'd run back there and get around these trees and skin the cat and chase and all that sort of thing. And the big Indian chief, Tony Tommy, was in the class, and he'd play out there with us. And sometimes.
Oh, he's a lot bigger than you, wasn't he?
Oh yeah, he was a grown hell of a big man. He was big as you.
Yeah, because in
He
1930,
made a big impression on us.
he started in school in 1913. There, I have a count. At 1913, the second grade, he was 17 years old then.
Yeah.
In 1913, he was 17 years old.
He wasn't any dummy. It was just because he had a lot of things to do or had a lot of digressions. And then he had to go to Oklahoma and one thing and another. But he was a fine guy.
I guess he's dead now.
Oh yeah, bound to be.
Tony Tommy. And you knew him well, huh?
Yeah, sure.
Did he play on any of the teams?
Hello,
No.
everybody.
No, he's too big.
Too
play
big
with
for
us
that.
kids, yeah.
Could
And
you
he
talk
didn't
to him? Could you talk to him all right? Did he speak
Oh.
English?
Good, just as good as any of us.
Is that right?
Oh hell yes.
Well, where did he live? He didn't come all the way in.
No, he lived at the Indian camp.
Oh, the
over
Indian
near-
campus over there on the
near
river, wasn't
near
it?
Stranahan's house.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Across the river. I mean, across the railroad track.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's where.
Yeah, that's right. I've forgotten about that.
So
Now, let me ask you, in regard to, you played the basketball. I mean, the basketball games were played down in that old gym,
I
and
don't remember when that thing. I
Yeah.
think probably it was built. Maybe 2 or 3 years. I just guess 2 or 3 years after the main school.
well, see, I started playing in that gym in 1932 and 33.
Well,
That was
see,
10 years after you left.
Yeah.
And it must have been the
And,
same gym because it was it wasn't real old, but it wasn't a new building either when I
Well,
played in it.
Nothing to age it so much, except that the lockers and everything stunk to high heaven.
Yeah.
And
Well, you had no fans.
No,
You had no fan, no ventilation back
and
there.
It had a wooden floor and a good one, all kept
Oh,
well
beautiful,
shined
shined up, yeah.
And on the front where you came in, they had a alcove or balcony, like that overhung one end with a basket down there, and you could have a group of people come up and watch the progress of the game as well as on the sides.
I see.
You remember that balcony? Like
Yeah,
that?
I'd forgotten all.
hazy.
I'd forgotten all
Look down,
about
you
that.
went up
That's
steps
right.
there, went up
That's
steps over
exactly.
there,
Yeah,
stuff
that's
like
right.
that.
They had. It seemed like to me they
Yeah.
had a coach's office back up on
They did.
on the east
Probably.
corner on the east
Uh-huh.
corner up there.
And toilets were down at the either end, at the other end,
Mm-hmm.
at the other end down there. It seems to be that way. Anyway, roughly that was the idea.
And you played baseball there on the old, was it Stranahan Field? That was the baseball
Stranahan
field.
yeah.
That was the baseball. They hadn't started playing out west of town.
Oh, no.
Because well, they built the stadium out there in 1925. You knew Cap Reed then.
Yeah.
Did he have anything to?
Came here last time, two or three times or so.
No, I'm talking about Cap Reed. He's
the old Cap Reed.
Yeah. He
sure
died years ago.
Yeah,
old Cap Reed.
Him.
He was a mayor for a long time.
Right. Yeah,
He was my baseball coach.
Inez Reed's father.
Right. Callahan, I think one of the girls is a Callahan.
Right.
Yeah, old Cap Reed.
Sure.
Now, Cap, did he do any coaching over at the high school?
None at all.
How about Hamilton Foreman? Did he
Hamilton Foreman is several years since me, younger than I.
No, but I'm talking about, did he, the father?
Oh, you mean the old man?
Old man. Did he do any coaching?
Old man Foreman. Damn little, only as a sort of ex officio.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Kind of.
Charlie Rhodes said that Foreman used to run with him. They used to run.
He used to be a.
They used to run.
Track man.
Yeah,
from,
Illinois. He was from Illinois.
I guess he's from Illinois. He used to be a track man. George's mouth was quite muscular from the long distance running that he had done, and he did a lot of it. And he kept up with it.
Charlie said he used to run with the old man. That they used to run cross country.
I guess he did, but that was before my. You see, Charlie's a year or two ahead.
Yeah, well, he's 21. Yeah. So you graduated in 23. Then what did you were still living in Colohatchee at that time, and what did you do when you graduated? There you were in 23. You were 18 years old.
Went to school.
You went to University of Florida.
Well, I stayed out 1 year, tried to make enough money to go.
Oh, you stayed out 1 year. What kind of work did you do?
Well, did a little bit of everything. Worked on farms and made crates and packed vegetables and had a job with a plumbing firm for a little while, and helped to do that. Got to be a plumber's apprentice, and things of that sort.
Did you make
Did
you make enough money to go to school?
Didn't take a hell of a lot, but I made enough money to go the first year, and my dad helped me some too. And we kept on going, and of course by that time the staying out 1 year, that was the first year we went 25. Then the next year, in the fall of 26 storm wiped everything out. And it seemed like I managed to stay there. And then things began to get kind of hazy. And then the 28 storm came along and wiped some more out. And the hell with this. So
well, how did you get to be a golf architect? Did you?
Everybody asked me that. Precipitation of a number of economic as well as I had the word a while ago and I can't think what I want to say.
Well, what do you think? Let me ask you. When I used to see you down at that softball field, that was about 34, 35, in that general period, what were you doing then? You said you were living up in that triangle building up there in Progressive. What were you a golf architect then?
No.
Oh.
No such thing as an architect.
Okay.
I was working at I was the greenskeeper, superintendent out here at the Fort Lauderdale Country Club.
Oh, you're out there, and Norman Summers was out there.
Norman Summers was the pro.
Yeah, all right.
A number of coincidental circumstances, as well as economic circumstances, as it happened in that period, of economic life of the country, and in which I grew up in, caused me to be in the golf field. I had played golf down here at this first place down there with my brother several times. I used to like it. I thought it was great stuff. But,
that's the old South.
Yeah.
That's the old South where the airport is now.
The airport is. Yeah. And of course, being as active we were at that age, that wasn't enough to keep me busy. We did a lot of other things, but when I went to school, used to play a lot of golf.
What were you going to major in at school?
Arts and science.
Well, I mean, any particular trade that you're
just physics? No.
Oh, physics.
Physics and arts and science.
You're talking about physics.
Majored in physics of the arts and science school.
Okay, all right.
I didn't go into chemistry. I didn't go into.
I just said you wasn't physical education. You wasn't physical education. It was physics.
No,
Okay, physics.
But I didn't finish.
Yeah,
right. I don't like to say too much about that, but I don't give a damn anymore. But the combination of circumstances, economic as well as national, as well as my own life and so on, and the activity and the endeavors and the various things that I like to do. When I got out of school and I found I couldn't go back, or I wasn't going to go back anyhow, I intended to go back.
You didn't intend to go back?
I did intend.
Oh, you did intend to go back.
I got a job at the Boca Raton Club that I was living in Pompano at the time. That was right after the 28 storm. Not long after.
Oh, when did you marry? Let's figure.
I was married in 28.
So you got married in 28. So you're.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So that's another reason I didn't go back to school. Couldn't. I mean, didn't have enough money for that, and it didn't make a difference.
And you began to have a family. You
began
to have a family.
So I didn't plan to go back right away. Anyhow, I'd take care of that 2 or 3 years hence. That's always a picture.
Yeah.
But I got a job at the Boca Raton Club, which is just then beginning to be built. The first 18 had been there of a sort under the old Meisner development situation. Yeah. But the new bunch that came in, the new group, new company, owned by C.H. Geist of Philadelphia.
How you spell that? C-H-G-U?
Geist. G-I-E-S-T.
G-I-E-S-T. And they took
the
over.
Owner and the developer of the Boca Raton Club.
After Meisner.
After the Meisner Development Corporation had it. And he added 18 more, revised and redesigned the first 18, added all the other facilities and the amenities, and made it what Boca Raton has become today.
That's the 30. They have 36 holes up there, right?
Yeah. And at the time when I was there, we put in a 9-hole pitch and putt, which is one of the new features of golf course development installations at that time. Put in that too, and that was about the time that also that they put in a 3-par pitch and putt, not a 3-par, but a pitch and putt up at Augusta National in a general. Not at the same time, but I mean somewhere along about
general
that,
period.
Yeah. So, matter of fact, that was done in a kind of a general sense, all around the very private, fine development clubs around the country. Well, then after I began working there, I got along so well, that for singing I was made assistant superintendent and this and that and the other, and I saw all the various aspects of construction and how that these people did things, and wasn't any bulldozers there. It was all mule team and slip pans. You know what they are?
I can guess, but I don't know for sure.
Well, a slip pan is the thing. The operator has to run along behind with 2 handles and dig it in the ground.
Okay, I know what.
Balance and so on, so that the mule team and the driver takes it around, and then you follow it around, and they have somebody that flips it.
Yes, sir.
So it wasn't any dozer and heavy equipment of that sort at all. No graders, dozers, rippers, or anything. It was all done with mule and slip pan. And then big crews of men that would handle the material and shape it whatever you wanted. Well, from that I never left golf course work.
So how long were you at the Boca Raton Club?
2 years.
That'd be 28 to 30.
Yeah.
And then in 30
but 29 to 30.
29.
39 to 31 about.
And then about 31, you went out to Fort Lauderdale Golf and Country Club.
No, 31, 32. I was in. I went with them, the superintendent, up to Seaview, the Seaview Club at Atlantic City. I was up there for 2 years, about 2 years. Anytime limits or factors don't overlap just precisely.
Yeah, I
like
understand.
my memory
Right, I understand exactly.
I was up there for 2 years, and added to a great deal of, and also owned by the same people, sage guys of
Philadelphia.
Same thing. And did a lot of revision work up there. No, I was had the opportunity to find out, learn, and be in on a lot of revision work that was done at the time. They had added 9 more holes up there.
So you started at Fort Lauderdale about 1934 then?
Then in 35, I was only at Fort Lauderdale about 1 year, 1 season. I came back down here, going to, I forget just why, but we left the Seaview Club, came back to Fort Lauderdale to take a job at some other club. But in the meantime, I met with the commissioners, one thing and another, and I got the job out at Fort Lauderdale because I liked it here. I mean, it was home and
Yeah, sure.
So I wasn't there but a year when I got the job at the Mama Biltmore.
Mama Biltmore.
As a superintendent.
Superintendent of the Greens, is that what you call it?
Superintendent of the golf course. That's what you call.
Now, Mama Biltmore.
What you call superintendent, I mean, you run the golf course.
Right. Now, is that the same as...
the Mama Biltmore.
Yeah, but I mean, is that what... Did that become the old veterans?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the one. That big building is what?
Yeah.
That big building
yeah.
there.
That was one of the first. That was built way back in 22 and 23.
Is that building still standing?
Yeah. I should say it is.
And they still have the golf course
there?
there?
It's a big, fine golf course.
Yeah, I've been there. I've
Only
been there.
belongs to the city.
Well, it belongs to the city now.
So the Biltmore went there in 36. And some part of 36, whatever it was. And I was there to the beginning of the war. Or a little bit after the war. So after with the beginning of the war, I either had to get in it or be drafted. They were going to draft me as a common soldier. I was going to have to take a job at something. So I went and posted engineers group and was transferred to St. Petersburg. And
What kind of engineer group was that?
Post engineers. You know, they ran all the properties and the airports and the using areas and everything. They were the post for all the posts in the country.
Oh, I see. This is government. This is government work. Okay,
yeah.
Government work. All right.
And under that, I had 3 or 4 golf courses, and they gave me the job because I had experience with golf courses and so on, of which they had to have several. They had training fields, and they took these places over, and they had to have somebody that understood in order to make a report, a survey, and give it back to the owner when they got through. And I did a lot of that. I did a lot of that after I came back to Mama Beach. I'd make report surveys on golf courses that they'd used, tore up, and everything. Even the Boca Raton South course, they tore it up.
So you got into the work really through through experience.
Experience, and plus having enough academic background to make good use of it. Felt so after the Biltmore experience, I mean the Army experience after the war, of course. Then immediately I was engaged to rebuild the area, which is now the Riviera Country Club.
Riviera Country Club.
And the Riviera
what part
Country
of Miami is that in?
Coral Gables.
Oh, in Coral Gables, okay.
Just across the road from the Biltmore. And I did enough revision on it to make it an 18 hole, and they established the Riviera Country Club from the group of people that used to belong to the Biltmore Country Club, that used to comprise the men's club of the Biltmore, the old Mama Biltmore. Well, when the war, because they didn't have any place. So they didn't have any place to play. During the war, it was used by the veterans and so on. That's where I played with Ben Hogan a couple or three times. You know, he and Colonel Chennault, and old Ned Everhart, we'd play golf together. Like that.
Claire Chennault, the general?
Colonel Chennault, the cousin to the Tiger.
Yeah, cousin, okay.
But he was the CO at the club.
I
mean, the hospital. Oh, man, he loved golf. Well, anyhow, so after the war, immediately we started on that work and we built that the Riviera, and that became the Riviera Country Club. Knew everything about it. Well, from that, then I maintained that for some 13 years, but in the meantime, that one club, that one little job didn't keep me pinned down to what I wanted to do. That was just like doing something with the hand tied behind my back. I was consultant then, began to pick up some consultant jobs, and from consultant jobs I would have to do revision work and then do a lot of drawing and planning, and I wasn't completely unfamiliar with it either. I already had a damn good start. That's the reason I could get the job. Then I got a job immediately. I mean, about 1948, I got a job as consultant for 2 clubs in Havana. And I went to Cuba for 13 years, once a month, and never missed a damn month. Never missed a month. And I did a lot of
That's 2
revision
country
work.
clubs in Havana.
There was 3 of them there.
3.
Then. I mean, 3 of them there, and would be 4 now, except that the original country club of Havana is pretty well torn up, and they've got houses over it and one thing and another. I don't think it's being used as that at all. And even the old Jimenitas Club has been torn up quite a bit. But at that time, I went there as consultant for 2 or 3 of the clubs, whatever was necessary. But one, I was engaged all the time, and the second one, most of the time.
In Havana?
In Havana. I went there 13 years, once a month. I got a record of all that, all the work, the books, my record books by the month. From 1948 or 49 up right to the day. Today, whatever today is. So from that, I had to, as could be easily seen from experience, I increased my tempo of having to, with the consultant services, do more and more revision, planning, construction work. And
so you were really in business for yourself now?
Yeah. So in a short time, about 1955, I got the opportunity to design and build a brand new club, 18 holes, all on my own. I'm still with the Riviera Country Club.
Yeah.
Because that's just like, telling a nigga to clean the floor. I mean, no problem to that. No very big job of supervising and whatnot. Now, if we're going to change the floor, we're going to do something to make decorate. That's called something.
What was this club that you built?
But anyhow, Plantation, not Plantation, Crystal River Country Club.
Crystal River? Is that over on the west coast of Florida?
Yeah. It is now the Plantation Club there.
Over at Crystal River, Florida.
Crystal River, Florida.
So you designed and built that?
I designed and built that. That's my first 18-hole, brand new, single-soul, solitary.
Now, what year would that be?
That was
Or about?
That was about 1955, I said. 55 or 6. And then from then on, just a progressive rate of picking up more, doing more, and so on. Finally, I began doing jobs in South America. I've done 8 jobs in Colombia. I did 1 job and many revision consultant jobs in Caracas, in Venezuela. I've done work in Panama, but mainly in Colombia. and a hell of a lot of jobs all up and down the state and otherwise too. Charlotte, North Carolina, Colorado Springs.
What did you build in Colorado Springs?
Patty Jewett Club.
What's the name of it?
Patty Jewett. Belongs to the city.
How do you spell that?
Pattyjewett. Is
that a one
city
word?
Course.
City course.
2 words.
There's 2 words.
Mm-hmm.
Patty Jewett City.
It's the name of the guy's wife. It's the name of the wife of the guy that built it or initiated or gave the money to the city so they could have it. Now they had 18 holes.
About when did you build that? About when?
Well, I didn't build the club to start with. I revised the 18, but principally 9 of it, and added 9 more. And when you do that, that's like taking this building here. Now, Mr. Mahannah or Mr. Kirk, take this building, you're an architect, and this whole thing here, and I want you to build us on top and integrate with this, one of the best bank buildings that you can design. Look at the crap you've got to do to undo everything in order to design.
It's much harder than it is to start from scratch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there and like in Charlotte and I can't remember all the places. I did work in Flint, Michigan, and did a lot of design work. And a lot of design work you do doesn't ever get done. I mean, they don't do it.
Let me ask you: is there a professional organization that?
Yeah, sure.
What's the name of that?
Yeah, right here.
Oh, you got that initial there.
The initial, American Society of Golf Course Architects.
American Society of Golf Course Architects. So you belong to that. You remember
I'm
it.
a fellow member now because I'm older than 70.
Oh, I see. But you one time
my son is active as hell, and
he
I would
does
be active. I'm active anyhow, but I mean, I'm just a fellow.
Yeah, he's still he's in the same business, but you're not in the same company.
No.
What was the biggest job?
If I want him to help me, he does. If he wanted me to help him, I do.
What's the biggest job you ever done?
They're all big jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're all not all big jobs in that every one I ever did was a big job, but I mean, a big job is a big job. 18 holes to 36, they're all big jobs.
What do they say? What's the hardest job you ever did?
Well, I don't know about that. That would be, I mean, every one of them takes
It's not easy.
from 2 to 3 years to consummate.
So you're still in this business? Are you? Would you say you're half?
Yeah, but very little.
You're kind of half retired, huh? About half retired?
2/3.
2/3 retired, So you're about 77 years old now, huh? You were born in 1905?
I'm 76.
76. All right.
Be 77 next September.
And you live in Miami now. I have your address here.
I got it right. If I don't add my marbles up right.
9201 East Calusa Drive, Club Drive, Miami, Florida. That's where you live.
77, huh? Yeah.
That's where you live.
You're right. Just a little home I moved to after my wife died because I had no. I didn't want to.
Oh, how many children did you have?
2 boys and a girl.
2 boys and a girl. And they were all living.
Yeah.
And who did you marry? Someone from Fort Lauderdale? Did you marry someone?
Yeah.
Who did you marry?
Mary Ellen Morris.
Mary Ellen Morris. What did
but
her?
She never went to school here
I
very
see.
much. She went to school all the time. I mean, quite often. But she graduated in North Carolina.
I see.
But she was a local girl.
How many years ago did she die? 6
Miss
years ago?
Smiley, that one I'm
yes.
talking to, is related to some of her folks somewhere or other.
She died about 6 years ago, right?
74.
74. It'd be about 8 years
8
ago.
years now, yeah.
Well, I don't have much more tape here, but I want to get your impression of Fort Lauderdale when you were coming up as a boy. Now, most of it is Rock Road when you first started out.
Yeah.
Rock Road. And there's a lot of vacant lots, and you had sand.
If anything about this thing that you don't like and don't believe, you just raise your hand.
When you
Rock Road, yeah.
Yeah, Rock Road. There's a lot of palmettos growing downtown,
nothing but that.
and I mean all
We used
downtown.
to have tomato fights out of a tomato patch that Chief Tenbrook, Police Chief
Yeah,
Tenbrook,
DG Tenbrook.
raised right in the middle of town where Wall Street and Andrews intersection.
And that's you had. It's tomato farm right downtown, huh?
we would get in that dang thing and fight with each other, racing across there, and he'd raise hell.
What would you say is the most colorful person when you were growing up? Most colorful person, the person that stood out. Now Frank Stranahan came here early, but he was this quiet man, and you knew Mr. Stranahan.
Yeah, but he was already over the hill by a long ways when I was a kid, knew him, and his active days weren't very impressive. I mean, his days, latter days like that, weren't very impressive.
Yeah.
But I knew him all. I saw him a lot of times.
Yeah. But who was a big figure? Bill Kyle, was he a big shot here?
Yeah, and Bob Matthews' father.
Old Colonel Matthews.
He was a great fellow.
Yeah.
I remember him well.
What year did Bob graduate? What year did Bob graduate? Do you remember?
About the same as I.
Around that time. I got to interview him.
Whether he was my year or a year later. But
of course, Sarah, you knew his sister Sarah.
Tom Bryan.
Oh, what's your opinion of Tom Bryan? He was a biggie around here.
Well, yeah, but he was a product of the time.
Sure he was.
He was a outgoing, effervescent sort of fella and an opportunist and everything. And
was he crooked?
Well, who isn't? I mean, you're going to pass the gate at St. Peter's down here, or where do you get up there?
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
I don't think such a deliberate aspect.
No, but he was an entrepreneur. He went out.
Entrepreneur is right.
I mean, he said
a lot of Pundador and a little bit of Vivio and all of that too. So.
Charlie Rhodes, you worked for Charlie Rhodes, you told me.
Look at Charlie.
Yeah.
You think Charlie is going to get by without apologizing?
Yeah. His father, you worked for his father out in Venice, didn't you?
His father all real well. Oh, yeah.
How about Venice? What did you do out there to help with his father when he was digging those canals up there?
Well, he built a tractor. There wasn't very many tractors in those days of any sort. He built a tractor that was the framework of a Model A Ford, Model T, I forget. What year was that? I forget.
Well, 1924-25 when he started digging those canals out there.
T,
Yeah, Model T.
Model A didn't come along
Till 27, 28, yeah.
3 and 4. And of course, the old Model A motor was on there, and just the framework on top of everything, and reinforced crosswise and whatever not. And on the back, they had built or taken 2 great big old tractor wheels, which are very elementary sort of items, even though they were tractor wheels, but they were something like about 5 feet high, and they had big steel lugs all around. They were set into the frame in such a way that a small cog then would drive a great big gear cog inside. And I'll tell you, it had just one hell of a lot of power. Of course,
well, now, what did he use that for? What did he use it?
Well, we used it to pull slip pans and pull rocks and junk and things and knock down dirt. He didn't have any dozers out there. No such thing as a bulldozer.
In other words, it did the kind of work that a mule or a horse or ox would have done.
Exactly, more or less. And they had slip pans of different types of construction that would knock a bump off rather than to move it, because it was full of rock. The stuff was. You couldn't bite into it. It was loaded with rock. It was just a soupy rock. But he'd throw the drag lines and throw the thing up there and let the thing drain, and then he would have gangs of other guys too, and they'd be leveling this pile and raising the lot to a lot level in order for it to residually settle,
sure,
and set it up for sale. And I can remember him one time. He was, Charlie's dad was real great.
This is tape 2, side A of the interview by Cooper Kirk, the interviewer of Mark Mahannah, the interviewee at the Williamson restaurant in May the 15th, 1982. Excuse me, Art, you go ahead about Mr. Rhodes.
Mr. Rhodes is a great affiliative type of fellow. Very friendly, very innovative, very imaginative too. And he set this work up for me so that I could have something to do in the summertime when, in between school or after. I forget just when it was that this was done. His Venice Isles development. One of the things that I can remember that impressed me a great deal, and he was glad to do it because even he wasn't used to handling sums and throwing checks around and writing them like he showed me this one, but he had written a check for $10,000 for the dragline work and the excavation part, for some of the work of the excavation of those canals. And it was for the week or the month or whatever the situation might have been. And of course, $10,000 is just like 10 million now. It was an amazing amount of money. Just couldn't imagine that anybody would just sit out and write that all out on one check. So that's one of the little things that I think about him.
Well, he made a lot of money, lost a lot of money, and then he gained back. So he had but many of the people did that. Tom Bryan did the same thing. Tom lost everything.
Real imaginative sort of fella, and all on the up and up too. He was a great guy.
How about Cap Reed? You knew W.J. Cap Reed. He was mayor.
Very well, only as
you knew his children. You knew his children.
Only as individuals around town and what they represented. I think he was the mayor. Cap Reed was.
Yeah, he was mayor about 3 different times. He was the last mayor under the old council system.
It seemed to me, either in my class or just before or afterwards. I just don't remember which. Pip Bryan. He was.
Which Bryan is that?
He was Tom Bryan's boy. Pib.
Oh, Peb. Yeah. Mm-hmm, right.
And
he was tall, skinny fellow.
Tall, skinny kid, and he went up to. He was in a school track team, was a hell of a good pole vaulter.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, he born 1908 and died about 1950. He died early,
Yes, he did.
He died right early.
And then there was Stillwell.
Yeah, Tom and his brother Horace.
Yeah.
They bought the newspaper from the Galvin brothers, who had bought the newspaper from old Colonel Matthews. I think Colonel Matthews is one of the greatest men I've ever read about. What do you know about Colonel Matthews?
Bob's
father. Yeah.
I don't know anything about him much, except that he was always very impressive. His figure of comprehended was very impressive. You didn't have to see him; you just knew about him, you just heard about him, and he's always quiet and very effective and impressive and everything. Well, just kind of a great fellow.
He's kind of a power behind the scenes,
and
then.
always proper. Nothing but what was always proper.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't any scuttlebutt about it. He was just a real fine, clean.
And you knew Sarah, his daughter. You knew Sarah,
Yeah.
that married Charlie Krim.
Of course, I just knew her because of Bob being around.
Yeah, of course. I think she was older than Bob. I think she was older than Bob. She died. I interviewed her. I have a tape on her.
Did you?
Yeah, I interviewed Sarah. She's a beautiful girl, blonde, and married Charlie.
Well, they were nice looking folks.
Yeah, let me say this. It seemed like to me, I got a history about 3 months ago of the First Christian Church, and Ham Foreman's, his wife wrote it, Doris. And there's a Mahannah that's still living that goes to that church, or was just recently.
Well,
Now, who would that be?
that'd be Effie Mahannah.
Effie. Who's that now in relation to you?
That's my daughter. I mean my sister-in-law.
Your sister-in-law. Which of your brother did she marry?
She married my youngest brother, and he
Forrest.
died about a year and a half ago.
I see. What did Forrest do for a living?
Forrest is an engineer in the plant, a fluid-powered plant out on the West Canal.
Oh, out there on 441?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd been with them for years and years and retired.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And
What about when you were a boy? What kind of games did you play? Did you play? You didn't play football, did you? Because football wasn't big. I don't mean at school, but I mean around your house. Did you play skin the cat on trees and play marbles and little sandlot baseball?
Did a lot of sandlot baseball stuff. But we had other activities that
fishing
much more interesting and much more intriguing than just the ordinary little games of playing hide and seek or something around the house. We went hunting.
Where'd you go hunting?
All out in the woods where we were in Colohatchee.
Yeah, that was wild. That was wild country out there.
Yeah, you had the world at your beckoning.
What could you kill? Could you kill turkey? Do you eat turkey with it?
We didn't do so much killing as we just went out camping and hunting, and in those days, wild grapes were profuse.
Wild grapes. You had wild grapes here.
And we'd climb those big cypress trees and break off big bunches and chunks of that stuff and gather them by the tubfuls, and make grapefruit juice out of them. And
how about guavas? Did you ever use guavas? Make guava jelly?
Oh, yes. That was such a pastime, not a pastime, but that was such a business that it became a sort of a business that many people gathered guavas just to make jelly and made a lot of money, just selling by the bushel.
Whatever happened to the guava trees? When I was a boy, late 20s, we used to have guavas everywhere. All vacant lots, there were guava trees.
And for a tropical fruit and tropical tree, it is one of the best, and there's so many varieties. If you go down to the spice gardens in Homestead, they have probably half a dozen or maybe 10 different varieties of guavas in that spice garden. Cattleya guavas and so on and so on.
Oh, those cattleyas. Oh, that strawberry guava is a beautiful.
Greater. There's no greater.
Strawberry guava.
If you ever get the chance, you ought to
I used to
go
have
down
a tree.
and see that.
I used to have one of the Cattleya guava trees in my yard. It died, but
I don't know why.
let me. Did you people ever get in fights when you were a boy? You ever any fights, or you just peace loving?
Well, very, very seldom. Not very much, because we weren't fighting inclined, and it seemed like the bunch that we ran with, we weren't. It didn't. We didn't have to engage in that sort of combative activity to get along.
Okay, now did your parents expect, say when you got to 14 or 15 or 16, did they expect you to get a job after school or in the summertime to help support the family?
No, they didn't expect that, because it was just take it for granted. You worked all the time doing something, no matter what it was. You didn't. It wasn't a feature of expecting one that would do something. That you would do something because school was out or something. It was that whenever you were not in school, you did chores, you did this, and so on and so on. And naturally, it was just an accepted process that if you got through school, you would do something for yourself and so on, because folks couldn't take care of you. I mean, there wasn't any question about it. Everybody did.
Well, did you get a job to make money during school?
Always did.
for example,
Not doing-
what kind of job? You didn't have much grass to cut. Of
No.
course, people didn't have much
No,
yards
no,
back in those days.
It wasn't during school that you did it. You just out there on the
Work on a farm, work on a farm,
work
and
on a farm, and
you didn't work with the hours. You worked by the number of baskets you picked, or
oh,
piecework?
just whatever.
Pardon?
Did you know his number 11?
I sure don't. Maybe someone in that room can tell you.
Did you know his number 11?
So,
Well, whatever the farm work called for, we worked for the boys who worked for my dad.
mhm.
And before we went to school, we did certain chores, and when we came back, we did certain.
What do you mean before in the morning before you went to school?
Yeah,
you had
sometimes.
some.
Well,
Did y'all ever have a cow?
We had a dairy for a while.
You had a dairy for a while up there in Colohatchee. Huh?
Yeah.
You know, I probably seen your father.
Concurrently, the time a foreman had there,
Uh-huh.
because he was a big operator.
Yeah.
Dad was small.
When did your father die?
I don't know, about 40.
Well, I must have known your father because I knew practically everybody. I used to work with this young fella. See him?
You didn't work with us, did you?
Yeah, I worked up there in Tarpon. I had 2 wrecks in 1 week up there. Jimmy lost a little hair.
Think
You
you
know.
No, I didn't lose any hair then. I lost it after that. I tell you, when my hair really started dropping out, when I found out I had cholesterol, I had to quit eating eggs.
Yeah.
And I think that had a lot to do with
Well,
it.
you eat the yolk, did when you
You eat the
eggs.
whites, but you couldn't eat the yolk.
What are you doing back down here, Jimmy?
Bill Boyd called me and said he lost his wallet.
Oh, my.
Wallet.
And I looked all over.
Let me see.
He called down here and he said nobody. Yeah, and he said, and the lady in there said, yeah. I
Don't
said,
leave that
somebody-
over there either. I don't know what
No.
that stuff
Well,
is.
that's my that's my checkbook
Yeah.
over there.
And he said.
Thank you for
somebody-
reminding me.
This lady in there said somebody lost a pair of glasses.
There's damn much more to it.
Yeah, I know there's a lot more to it. We turned it off just for a minute because Mr. Jimmy Thomas came in, and he's a class of what, 30? What 30? Class of 30 at Fort Lauderdale High School, and he gave us some very interesting information about his experience during World War II. It's now about 5:15, and Mr. Mahannah's got to get back to Miami, so I'm gonna have to wind this interview up. But I do want to ask you 1 or 2 more questions. Now, you've already talked about you did a lot of hunting, you went camping,
Mm-hmm.
and you worked for your parents, and it was expected of you. What about, of course, that 1920s? After 1920, you had Prohibition. Did you? Was there some illegal sale and manufacture of alcohol here in the county that you were aware of?
No, I wasn't.
Now remember, it's way after that. The law
Yeah.
statutes have run out now since then, so you can testify.
No, the only thing about that was that it was a generally foregone conclusion that it was illegally made and processed and disseminated throughout the whole darn country. It wasn't just here.
Yeah.
But of course, the principal activity was the running of it from the islands
Yeah.
over here.
That's the glamour part. That's the glamour.
part,
Yeah.
and a very effective
Yeah.
part too.
You know, in 1925, I read in the newspaper in 1925, and I found there in Oakland, what is now Oakland Park, that the law officers, they discovered a still up there, and it run by Mr. Heflin. You remember anybody named Heflin? Well, he claimed he was just in that, happened to be out hunting, and he was just in that area hunting when Paul Bryan, the sheriff, came up on that still. Well, anyway, it was pretty much in your neck of the woods up there, because you were there in Colohatchee. But I remember you were in University of Florida by 1925.
Yeah, I was gone from there.
But
Yeah.
you don't remember the Heflins, do you?
I remember the name.
Yeah,
but
well,
not
they had
the
they had quite a record here of bootlegging, you know.
people. Yeah, well, there's no doubt about it.
2 or 3
There's
boys.
several
Yeah,
others, too.
yeah, right.
But, a great part of the activity was bringing it in. They'd run it in over here on these boats and barges and one thing and another, and park around the mangrove swamps and rivers and outlets and get rid of it without any trouble.
All right, now, did you attend the First Christian Church?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in 1925, the minister, he was doctor or somebody, I got his name down,
Mm-hmm.
he knocked off being the minister down there. Hendricks
Woodard?
is what?
Woodard?
No, Woodward came after him. I knew Woodward.
Yeah.
But this fellow became, the city of Fort Lauderdale hired him to take a census in September 1925 because they figured their population was so much greater than it was when the state took it at the beginning of the year.
Take census.
Yeah, he took the census, and he came out with 16,000 and some odd, and the state had found 6,000 in February, and now in September he had found 16,000. Anyways, this town of Fort Lauderdale almost tripled from March, when the first census was taken, until September and October. It took him about a month to do
During
it.
the boom.
That during the boom
Yeah,
period.
Because they're bringing them in there.
Right. Do
They're
you
like
remember?
crazy.
Do you remember Dr. Campbell, the health officer, D.L.
Yeah,
Campbell?
yeah,
You know, his daughters
yeah.
were here today,
Yeah.
and most people don't realize he was our first.
Yeah.
He was. I don't know if he was our first health officer, but he was one during the boom period.
He was a veterinarian.
He was a veterinarian, but he was
was a
also the health
veterinarian,
officer. He was the health officer for Fort Lauderdale during the
He
boom
lived
period.
back of this building, this triangle.
Right. He lived up there on Northwest
Well,
Third
I know
Avenue,
him
but
well.
but you couldn't get.
He was a
Yeah,
very
northeast.
nice
You
fellow.
couldn't get across the track then. You couldn't get across that track. That crossing wasn't there. You lived in what's called the Stetson Apartments. That's,
Stetson Apartments.
yeah,
That's
you know where the
right.
Stetson Apartments are there? That building
that's
built
it.
during the boom time?
I
That
live-
triangle building,
I
right?
live
Still a
there.
beautiful place after all these years.
Hey, we're disturbing these people.
Okay.
They can't hear.
All right.
I mean, if it,
Okay,
if
well,
it
I'm gonna
like so, I
I'm gonna
don't
cut my
know.
voice down, and then we're gonna
Yeah.
quit. I'm trying to
You
get the
gotta quit.
I'm gonna get the feel this time. Nice to see you,
Going on,
Jimmy.
go,
I
Jimmy.
gotta go back home. I gotta go to a barbecue tonight.
Oh.
Like listening to some of the big lies sometimes.
Night, Jimmy. I'm with the Broward County Historical Commission. It's a government agency. I'm the county historian, the official county historian. Now, I would like permission from you if we decide to publish some of this or use it in research, to get your permission to do it. What's on tape?
You can do so where it is appropriate only.
Mm-hmm.
And now, how are you going to decide what am I going to decide? Well, if you select the most appropriate out of it, which is due to proper language and proper construction and a few other things, and nothing referential that would be a reflection.
No, I don't think you've said
then
it.
I think that if it's appropriate, yes. What the heck? I don't care.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't think you said anything that's. I don't remember anything you said that was
in any
that
thing of this
reflected
sort,
upon
it
anybody.
Really, it needs editing. in
Oh yeah,
order
I mean
to
we would do
properly-
that. We'd if we publish anything, we'd certainly edit it
Schoolwork,
all.
school people and everything, and
But see, you're a
my
historic.
work through the
Yeah.
golf course and so on. I mean, that's
Yeah, I mean you're a
That's,
historical person because you've been here so long, and you have a good recollection of these events. If I interview a lot of people, they can't remember. You know, they're past the time of remembering. But you have a very good memory. I've interviewed a lot of people in historic matters in Broward County, and I say you rank well near the top of people I've interviewed because you're able to recollect.
oh well. It's to me. Don't turn that damn thing off if you don't listen to this.
All right, okay. Then we have your permission to publish appropriate material from this.
Appropriate material, right.
Which would be educational and historical.
Right, that's right.
Fine. Thank you very much,
Very
Mr. Mahannah, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And
We'll resume later on.
maybe we can get back together again.
Sometime. Finish the story.
Fine. Thank you very much.
I am Mark Mahannah. I'm a member of the Fort Lauderdale graduating class of 23. I have received a copy of a manuscript from Cooper Kirk in which he has recorded a history of town and school athletics of that early period. And he has asked me to comment on it as I read it and offer appropriate remarks insofar as my knowledge and recollections are relevant. First, it took me 2 or 3 days to do it, it was like reading an intensely interesting story in a magazine without advertisements. To me, slow reading allows for appreciation of composition. It clears the memories. Anyway, anything worthwhile reading presents a lot of work in composition, and to appreciate it properly, one should take time to savor the background, research, discovery, nuances, the things that it took to put it together. I go to page 10 where John Whitcomb Riley, 1914, is mentioned. I remember very well seeing him sitting there in his car or carriage, I don't know which, and we marched all the way from the school from south of the river and paraded in front of him with our teachers. And he was a little old fellow with a big bunch of white bushy whiskers and real pleasant looking, looked like a Santa Claus. Anyway, he would say a few words maybe to the group as we went by and wave, and I was really impressed. I thought that was a wonderful thing. Right about now, I remember about Norma Hammer Albury. She was the one that wrote the story for The Legacy of a year or two back about her life as on the canal bank in Davie. I thought she did such a wonderful job of it, and during the meeting of the pioneers down at the port, when she was honored, and you said that the story did not have to be edited at all, that it was reprinted, put in the legacy just like she had written it. I thought it was an extraordinary achievement. I'd like to see her write a short story on one of her boat trips to the Lake Okeechobee, up and down the canal in those early days. I'm sure she was there, and tell it from her point of view just what she could tell it. She could tell it like she remembers it, about the wildlife, the stops along the way. I bet it would be a real interesting account. Page 7, the Rickards. Mr. Rickard met Dad at the train, away 1914, and found us a place to stay. We had been in Palm Beach, having arrived maybe a couple of weeks earlier, last part of December in 1913, but apparently Dad had made contact and arrangements with Mr. Rickard to find us a place to stay, and he came on down to Fort Lauderdale. Both families were staunch friends throughout all their lives until the days of deceasement. Page 10. I remember all the kids, all the people mentioned on that page, and especially Mr. Bratzel, the principal. I think he was one of the best, one of the nicest fellows, even though I didn't know enough to evaluate anybody at that time. In looking back, reflecting on it, seeing the pictures and so on as it used to be, and his wife and the young person, I thought he was one of the best that we ever had at the school. Page 11. It says here the school was dedicated September 1915. I remember very well parading with all the kids from the other classes, our class, walking across the bridge to the new school building north of town, and it was quite an impressive affair for us kids. Flags waving, and such a huge building, and a creek along the back of the property where we could run and climb trees. Another observation, all 4 classes of high school, freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, was in the large study hall on the 2nd floor, northeast side of the building, and always was when I was there. Also, my dad, C.S. Mahannah, not C.P., C.S., was on a school board during the Rickard years and was there through 23 when I graduated. He, along with Smoke and Mr. Neville and the principal, Rickards, signed my 23 diploma, which I have hanging on the wall right here near in my bedroom. One of the things about 4 grades of high school in one big room, the morning greetings, the announcements, special information, talk by the principal, and the music and songs. Also being able to see the great athletes, Gordon and all those older fellas, giving their accounts and showing off. We were in on everything. That's the reason, as well as everything else that one could possibly think of, that has always let me feel that the best 4 years of my life, before or since, were my high school days. Stop and repeat this again. One of the things about 4 grades of high school in one big room, the morning greetings, announcements, special information, talk by the principals, and music and songs. Also being able to see the great athletes, Gordon, or all the other older fellows giving their accounts and showing off. We were in on everything. That's one of the reasons, as well as many others, that has always let me feel that the best 4 years of my life, before or since, were my high school days. Stop. Pages 20 to 27 pretty much recounts what I would say I would remember by prompting. There again is the influence of being a part of it all in our own absorbent way in one big study hall. Page 27. Geneva Rickard, daughter of C.E. Rickard, was one of the popular girls on the War Bond Drive sponsoring team. One of the features being a current model of a war tank said to have been pulled out of action for display. It clanked around an open field behind the stores fronting Wall Street, Andrews Avenue, and so on, shoving down little pine saplings and small trees. Very awesome. On about page 37, Enter Prescott, the Superman of Fort Lauderdale, in the school programs. I can't speak for all the others, but to me, and the kids I knew the best, no one was greater than Prescott. His encouragement and praise to and for all of us in our school classes and in athletics has been the fondest and most beneficial sort of memories. It would take one of your manuscripts sized editions to lightly cover our experiences and regard for him. Stop. Prescott did well in real estate also. As a contractor, I think he built the golf course clubhouse out west of town, and at the time it was the most expensive and the finest building of its sort for golf course clubhouses that was ever built up to that time. Something like that is to say, municipal golf courses. On page 14, on page 44, it mentions the smart kids we had in our class. One of them, Willis Johnson, was born in Oxford, Florida, and early on came to live and be reared by his aunt and uncle, the C.W. Johnsons in Colohatchee. We both lived in what was called Colohatchee at that time, an Indian name for Collier's Creek, the North Fork of Middle River. We lived about a half a mile apart and went to school for years on a school bus. First a horse-drawn wagon with parallel seats in it, driven by Mr. Price, who had the school contract, and then later on a Model T Ford arrangement of early discovery, driven variously by Boyd Anderson and I don't know who all. We had to get in our school activities, say it like this, we had to get in our school activities in between school bus arrival and departures, or go back at night. Other than our homework and chores, our time was pretty well filled with a lot of interesting things to do. Willis deceased early in life, probably about age 40 or 50. Having long since moved away, I never knew why. Stop. Another thing I remember about Prescott, after the year 23 the school was out, I decided to stay out for a year, earn a little money farming or working someplace before I went to school, so I'd have something to go to school on. I went to Dad and asked him for some money, and he said, why don't you go borrow it from John Prescott? And I thought at the time, well, why don't you borrow it for me, Dad? But anyway, I went down and saw John, and we went to the bank, and he stood good for the $100 that I borrowed. And later on, I found out that Dad had backed him up, so it was a big deal. Later on in the year, I was able to pay him back early, but I'll never forget it because that was my first venture into high finance, and it involved John, and I just never forgot the situation. Stop. And about Charlie Rhodes, we always called him Charlie, not Charlie, or Dusty. Called him Dusty a lot. Never knew him to be called Kid unless by somebody calling him a kid that didn't know him. Always running around hollering, screaming his head off, getting your attention or you getting his. I saw him last at one of the class reunions 3 or 4 years ago. Couldn't believe I was seeing him incapacitated as he was. I got a chance to greet him, and he brightened up and said, "Hey, Hanny, where did you come from?" and so on. There was a smother of people around him wanting to say something, and that's the way it goes with those real old-timers. Cooper, here it is, May 28th, Sunday. In reviewing this, I see that I have used about 2/3 of the tape, and what I have said in my halting, hesitant way doesn't impress me at all. I'm going to return mail it tomorrow rather than wait any longer. If you can see where I can do something more or better, please give me a call. Mark.